My name is Wickett, and I'm an MES student here at York and the GA coordinator for CANSEE, so that's grad assistant. Also, I've been working in the space of corporate sustainability for about 10 years now, both here in Canada and overseas. The presentation is going to work with 35-minute presentations from both Bob and Alan, and an opportunity for us to have 10-minute questions at the end. Can you hear me back there? Yeah? Okay, great. So it is my distinguished pleasure to get this panel discussion started with the introduction of our chair and moderator for this event, Mr. Toby Heaps. Toby is the CEO and co-founder of Corporate Knights and CK Capital. He also enjoys long walks on the beach and rollerblade. No, sorry, that's a different presentation. He spearheaded the first global ranking for the world's 100 most sustainable corporations in 2005, and in 2007 coined the term clean capitalism. He sits on the Sustainable Accounting Standards Advisory Board and the University of Toronto's Environment and Finance Committee. He also is a director at the National STEP Canada and Ashoka Canada. Toby has been published in the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Globe and Mail, and is a regular guest speaker on CBC.
So thanks for joining us this Saturday morning. Looking forward to this panel. The first panelist I'd like to introduce is Alan Richardson. He's the ODAT Research Chair and Professor of Accounting at the ODAT School of Business at the University of Windsor. He's been teaching environmental accounting and sustainability reporting in business schools since the 1980s. That's a long time. So he's a real veteran in this space because a lot of people have just come to it in the last 5 or 6 years. And the data is really just kind of the last 5 or 6 years. His research on the role of social and environmental information in equity valuation has appeared in leading accounting journals. In 2010, he received the L.S. Rosen Outstanding Accounting Educator Award, given by the Canadian Academic Accounting Association for contributors to Canadian accounting education over a sustained period of time. He is currently president-elect of the Canadian Academy Academic Accounting Association. Bob Willard, he's a good friend and mentor. He's a leading expert on quantifying and selling the business value of corporate sustainability strategies and has given hundreds, I might even posit, having entered into the 4 digits, I would be surprised if he hadn't 1,000 by now, keynote presentations to corporate, government, university, and NGO audiences. His 4 books, 2 DVDs, Business Case Simulator Dashboard, and worksheets, an extensive master slide set provide capacity-building resources for sustainability champions inside companies and in other entities as well. He worked for 34 years previously with IBM Canada, retiring in 2000. He serves on the advisory boards of the Natural Step Canada and Forum for the Future US, is on the ad hoc advisory committees for sustainable business certificate programs at 3 Ontario colleges and universities, and is a citizen member of the Durham Regional Roundtable on Climate Change. He was inducted into the International Society of Sustainability Professionals Hall of Fame in 2011, and he has a PhD in sustainability from the University of Toronto. One other interesting factoid about Bob is sometimes you hear the statement that corporations aren't people. Well, Bob is a corporation. He is a officially registered B Corp, and many of you will know what a B Corp is. It's companies which have a social mission baked in to their documents and meet various high standards. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome the panelists, and they'll give their remarks, and then we'll get the discussion underway. Thanks.
Well, what I'm going to do in 35 minutes is give you an overview on a couple of things that may be reinforcing or reassuring for you. You may wonder whether the business community gives a hoot about this stuff and why they would. And the question of traction came up yesterday a little bit too, as to how ecological economics gets traction somewhere else out of academia. I'm a little hopeful that it's starting to get some traction, and a lot of the challenge is to articulate what we care about from an ecological economics perspective in language and concepts that are familiar to the business community. We may not agree with that language and those concepts, but the fact is we need to meet them where they are. So my claim to fame is to help them quantify how good it could be if they got with the program on this stuff. That's called the business case for sustainability. So a lot of what I've been doing for the last 12 or 13 years is articulating that business case, using numbers to do that. And that helps them see how good it could be if they were more sustainable. I'm currently in a project that is trying to identify what the characteristics of the company would be if it were totally sustainable, truly sustainable. And then we'll follow that up with a business case to show that that wouldn't be a bad thing, it would be actually a good thing for the company as well. So I'm going to go through a bunch of slides here. If any of you are interested in the slides, I guess, Christine, people can get them after, can they? Okay, so these are yours to do anything you want with, and there are some references at the bottom of some of the slides that you may want to track down for more information. The reason I use those two symbols is that sustainability is now on the radar screen of companies. That's on the radar screens in boardrooms. This is a good thing. But the reason it is not so much because of how terrific it would be if they got with the program, it's more because of the risk if they don't. And the risk card, I think, is the one that we need to be smarter at playing as sustainability champions. One of the interesting things is we've had a little bit of support from a business guru by the name of Michael Porter, who co-authored this article in the Harvard Business Review. How many of you have heard of this article? Okay, so this is being used quite widely in business schools and so on as an indication that something's going on in the business community. And the interesting thing about this article is that he not only coined a new phrase, which is creating shared value, but he also is a little bit strident for a guy that's an ardent business person on being very critical of capitalism. And he gets away with that because he's got a lot of street credibility in the business community on the subject of capitalism. What he's saying is that the current flavor of capitalism is under siege. And if we cleaned up our act with capitalism, the current version, that we would actually benefit from a wave of innovation and growth. Of course, that's a pretty sensitive word in our circles, but anyway, that's what he's saying. It would be a good thing. And this brings up the question of what would this new form of capitalism look like? And as I'm sure you're aware, there are lots of people that are articulating the to state versus the from state as to where we want to get to with capitalism. And I'm going to give you a one-slide summary of a lot of the thinking that I've delved into around how this new form of capitalism would compare to the current form of capitalism. So if we call this current form of capitalism 1.0, and by the way, other people call it 2.0 and 3.0. So it depends where you start, right? But anyway, whatever it is now, call it 1.0. What would 2.0 look like? In corporate Knight's language, it's called clean capitalism. In other circles, it's called conscientious capitalism or breakthrough capitalism. It's a new form of capitalism. So if we were to take a look at this and compare them on a number of factors, the first very, very significant one is a slight change to the three-word mantra that you hear in MBA schools all the time, that the purpose of a company is to maximize shareholder wealth or value. And what we're saying is, that's a good idea, except why don't we just expand that a tad and say we're going to maximize stakeholder value. Just a little change. You'll notice that capitals are a little bit more inclusive. Profit includes multiple things other than the bottom line includes multiple profits and other things as well. And strategic focus is on stakeholder well-being as opposed to maniacal focus on growth and consumption. Sources of financial capital are a lot more diverse, much more local, much more creative. The market focus is more local, and then you get into the really exciting stuff, which is that right now companies externalize a lot of their negative impacts, and there's a growing sense that they need to be accountable for those, not only in their own operation, but as you can see in the supply chain and value chain that the company is a part of as well. That is huge. That is really, really huge. So when Puma came out with the first ever environmental profit and loss statement a couple of years ago and gave themselves a $195 million virtual bill for the damage they had done to ecosystems, it was an acknowledgement that they need to start getting their act together on this stuff. And the interesting thing is that only 5% of that footprint is coming from their own operations. The majority of it is coming from their supply chains operations. So and the business model needs to change dramatically, and that's a very, very profound line, and I could talk for 2 hours on that, but I'll just acknowledge that We need to stop throwing stuff away, which is useful product, useful material, useful resource, and keep it in circulation. So there are various names for what we would call that kind of economy. So as we take a look at this, we get pretty excited about how this would be fantastic. Actually, this would be good news if we got to capitalism 2.0. And the trick is, how the heck do we have this conversation with busy, hard-nosed business people who could, you know, on a good day maybe spell sustainability, but, you know, they're not kind of into it. So if you welled up the courage and you said, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to actually have this conversation, and you had an opportunity to kind of approach their office, you might notice that the door is just a little bit open, and you've been working on this for several months trying to psych yourself up for this, and you knock on the door, and you walk in, and you notice the guy is a little preoccupied. Just a tad overwhelmed with the current responsibilities that he has. And these responsibilities are probably exemplified by these piles of priorities on either side of his desk that are driving him nuts. He's probably measured on at least 2 or 3 of them. And you come along and you say, knock, knock, would you like some sustainability today? Doesn't look like it's one of those things that he is supposed to be paying attention to. So part of our challenge is how we frame this. So my first suggestion is, I think we need to be careful that we don't position what we're asking them to do as one more darn goal. And if you do, it'll be just added to the list of goals that they're trying to get on top of. It'll be put at the bottom of the list, and they'll reassure you that they really do care about this stuff, but right now they got these other things to worry about, and they will get to that sooner or later. Mostly later. So I am strongly suggesting we don't do that. What I'm suggesting is we don't position this as another goal. We position this as a set of enabling strategies that are going to help them be better at what they're already being measured on. That they are enablers, that they're not goals. And that may seem like a nuance, but if we're going to get any traction, we need to stop shoving this stuff down their throats and say, look, we're going to meet you where you are, and frankly, if you do pay attention to these things, you will actually be better on all of these priorities, which are already overwhelming you today. You with me on this? This is a strategy on how to get some traction. And as Peter Victor and Tim Jackson talked about yesterday, as they try to figure out how to have a steady state economy, no growth economy, they are using metrics like GDP. And they throw up on that as much as we throw up on that. But the thing is, it's what people are using, so they use it. And I think that we need to get more and more comfortable with that, swallow hard, and say, okay, well, actually, you could actually do better on all of these things. So let's take that little thing up in the upper left-hand corner called profit. How many of you think that a company could actually be more profitable, make more bottom line money, if they paid attention to what I call sustainability, economic, environmental, and social kinds of things? How many think they could make more money? Okay, so if you approach the door and you come with that claim, you should expect that they're going to ask you a follow-up question. How much? And we fortunately now know how to articulate that in terms that are relevant to them. It's called the business case. So what we're going to talk about here is the way in which that business case, from a lot of research, has been articulated. I did it first in 2002. That was the Sustainability Advantage. And then on the 10th anniversary of that book last year, came out with a new version, which is called The New Sustainability Advantage. Very clever title. So it was a pretty well total rewrite, recalibrated everything, used different cases and so on to back up some of the assumptions. The areas of benefit are relatively the same as they were before, a little bit more specific on some of the so-called low-hanging fruit of energy and waste and materials. And this book also gives them some strategies on how they can actually reap those benefits. So that's the laundry list of things that are possible to do, possible to get some benefits from if you're smart about your sustainability strategies. And then I thought, okay, well, how am I going to articulate or frame these things? And I thought, well, there are financial statements, so why don't we just use the income statement as an easy way to position these? So you take the income statement, which is wonderfully simple, and you put the opportunities, the 6 opportunities on one side, and you put the risks on the other side. So now we are talking in language they really understand. It's an income statement. It's a profit and loss statement kind of organization. So here's the critical question. How much more can we make? So listen carefully to how I'm going to phrase this. If a company were simply to do what other companies have already done, so we're not making this up, if they simply did what other companies have already done, best practices, just cream them off, and did them in their own organization within the next 3 to 5 years, not right away, but in the next 3 to 5 years, they could make a lot more profit. And they could do that because they're going to improve each of those by a certain percent. Whatever it is today, it's going to improve by a certain percent. So the revenue is going to go up, their top line revenue. They're going to make more top line, they're going to sell more stuff. Hopefully more services rather than materials and products, but they're going to make more revenue. They're going to get more revenue from 3 different sources. How much more revenue? Whatever they're making today, they will make at least 9% more than they're making today within the next 3 to 5 years, simply by doing what other companies have already done. They will save a lot of energy. That's the cost of their electricity and the cost of their fuel. That's a low number, but a lot of people think it's high. In the next 3 to 5 years, you can save at least 75% of the cost of what you're spending today. The cost of your waste and materials will go down by that. The increased productivity of your people will be about 2%, at least 2%. Your turnover cost will go down by at least 25%. And overall, your profit will go up by 51 to 81% in the next 3 to 5 years, simply by doing what other companies have already done. Are there any questions? So the obvious thing is, God, that looks like a big number. 51 to 81%. But just to make sure you understand how to read that, if the company today is making, let's say, 10% profit on their revenue, in the next 3 to 5 years, they'd be making 15 to 18%. It's an increase in whatever they're already making. Okay? You with me on that? Okay, so you would think that as a guy that's trying to prove that this is really a good deal, that I would be working very, very hard to get those numbers as high as possible. The irony of this is that I worked extremely hard to get those numbers as low as possible, because I was very concerned about that 51 to 81% being in triple digits, above 100%. Why? Right. Nobody would believe it. They'd think I was smoking something, right? It's actually in the hundreds. But I thought, from my experience with the first business case, I need to factor this down a lot. So all of those numbers have been brutally factored down so that the bottom number is 51 to 81%, especially employee productivity, which is the secret sauce for the whole recipe. You get your employees pumped and magic happens. And that number should be about 20, maybe 200%, but I factored it down to 2%. It comes from 6 different sources. The HR community is clueless on this, but there's huge, huge potential there. So what we've got here is a very, very robust business case. And on the flip side, if you said, no, we're kind of preoccupied here right now, we're not going to do anything, is there a risk that your profit might be eroded, especially if your competitors decided to do something and you didn't? Yes, there is. In fact, your profit could be in jeopardy by 16 to 36% from the 14 different sources the risks that I articulate in the business case. And by the way, there's a business case simulator, a set of Excel spreadsheets that anybody can download from my website. They're free, they're open source. Plug in your own company's numbers and see. Why is it 51 to 81%? Because I did it for a small services company, 6 consultants type thing, and a large manufacturing company. So that's the 2 ends of the spectrum. The simulator gives you how to seed it with those, but of course you have an opportunity to plug in your own numbers. There are 7 numbers that you need to plug in, and that's it. You can figure it out. So there was so much upward opportunity here that I actually creamed off half of the savings from waste, half of the savings from materials, put them into a rotating pool of capital that would help fund new projects that would then return back to that pool, whatever they needed in the first place, so it's a self-funding kind of thing. Why only those 2? Because I just wanted to show it was possible. I could have creamed off a lot from all of them. I just used those as examples. So that's the one slide summary of the whole book. And although you may be wondering if it's this great, why isn't everybody doing it? Because I don't think we've played the risk card well enough. In business, very often, that's the thing that gets their attention, is the whack on the side of the head. And as sustainability champions, I don't think we have been smart enough on showing them the downside. And then they'll see the upside. But first of all, we have to show them the downside. So that number, it's not so much the monetary risk, it's the binary type risk of a whole bunch of things. So I think I could be smarter on the risk part. We'll come to that after, in the questions. I don't have time. So yeah, okay. So where's the money come from on this? In some cases, it's actually built in. I've allowed for the money. But you should understand that there are 6 different sources of funds. If they'd have to actually invest some money, capital, in this, where's it coming from? Well, there are a number of things. First of all, existing budgets. The payback period on many of these projects is ridiculously short. I mean ridiculously short. Weeks or months, as opposed to grow old and wait for it to happen. It's really, really amazing. There was one company in Cambridge, Ontario that had 42 projects just on energy. They got an increase in profit of 76% over 3 years just from those 42 projects only on energy, that yellow line there. And their average payback period was 6.3 months. When it's that short, you don't need capital. You just use your budget because it gets back the same year. So, government grants and incentives in some jurisdictions, you have access to those. The rotating pool of capital we talked about, of course, you may have to go to outside markets. And rather than treating it as a capital kind of thing, call it an investment. And you would be hard-pressed to find anything that could give you the yield that these things do. And then, frankly, the 3 to 5 years, I don't start counting the benefit until the payback period or the assumed payback period has happened. So I start counting the benefits after 4 years if it's a 3-year payback. So that's the sources of funds. Now, so I humbly think that there's a really, really good business case. And yet you keep hearing executives in surveys saying, you know, they ask the question, why aren't you doing more? Well, because the business case isn't that great. I'm thinking, what? The business case is phenomenal. And I'm starting to understand that maybe we're using the term business case differently. So there are 3 different ways that we use the term business case. And I wrote 3 blogs on each of these. The first one is you could make more profit. That's what we've just talked about. The second one is you can make a fantastic return on your investment. And you can take a lot of the numbers from the first one and show that the return is really, really good, as I just mentioned. So that's a fairly robust one as well. The one that we are we need to be very, very careful about is claiming that your share price will go up. The stock market is a glorified casino. And for us to attribute any fluctuation in the price of the stock other than a dramatic drop of it when the company does something really, really stupid, there's an immediate drop, but over time it may actually come back to where it was before. So there is in most cases a lag factor. If the company did some amazing things in 2012, it may be 2013 before you start to see the impact in the stock market. And to attribute that change to this one little thing is hopeless. So I stay away from that. I don't make any claims at all about share price. And all the studies that give us hope around that, they're suspect. In fact, I had a whole chapter in that new book that was reserved just to show how fantastic this case was, that your share price would go up, and I finally gave up. All of the so-called evidence is pathetic. I don't trust it. I just don't trust it. Because what they're doing is they're comparing the better companies with the worst companies. And the criteria by which they're selecting those better companies, I think is pretty, it's not good. It's not good. So that leads me to an interesting question, which is, okay, well, if I was to select those companies, what's my criteria? How would I know a truly sustainable company if I saw one? I'm about to go into a different presentation. So what I've just talked about is that for companies using today's business model, there's a lot of upside if they got with the program on this stuff. I'm about to go into a second presentation, which is, I wonder how good it could be if they not only did more, but if they went the whole 9 yards and they became truly sustainable enterprises. First of all, is that possible? Secondly, what would that look like? And thirdly, would that be good news or bad news? Okay, that's where I'm going. And you would think by now that we would have a pretty definite idea of what a truly sustainable enterprise looks like. We don't. So I'm working with the Natural Step. Toby and I are both on the board of the Natural Step. We've been working for about a year on trying to define what we call a gold standard benchmark for a truly sustainable enterprise. And I'm going to give you sort of a current state of where we are on that and just see how it resonates with your thinking on this. We've got another year or so to go on it, but it's coming together. So essentially, when companies report, and Bill will be talking more about that, there are normally 3 benchmarks that they use to report on how it's going, how their progress on sustainability is going. Their performance today is what they are using as sort of their baseline, and they compare it with where they were before. So this is the continuous improvement approach, which is last year our carbon footprint was this much, and this year it's less, so we're going in the right direction. They may also have goals, next year's goals, 5 years goals, 2020 goals, 2050 goals, depends on the metric that they're looking at, that says this is our goal, and they track their progress as to how they are getting towards that goal. So that's the second benchmark. And then the big one is the one in which they compare their progress against competitors or other people in their sector, other companies in their sector. That's the big one. That's where the rating and rankings come in. That's the normal 3. And for financial results, that's okay. For sustainability results, not so much. Because you can really have some major problems if it looks like you're a leader, but you're nowhere close to where you need to be. So what I'm suggesting is that we need a gold standard benchmark which has a different kind of goal line. It's material, science-based, key performance indicators and goals associated where they need to be if they're going to be truly sustainable enterprises. And that's what we're trying to define. So how the heck do you do that? Well, what we're doing is we're starting with why we want to do this in the first place. There are 5 benefits. The sense of urgency is the one that's driving me the hardest. I am very uneasy that although there is some traction, there's not nearly enough to get us to where we need to be in time. And if you get kids and grandkids, it gets personal. So sense of urgency is really, really important. I think now, 2013, is a pretty good time to do this. 10 years ago, I think would have been a little bit early. 10 years from now, maybe a little on the late side. I think this is a good time to do it. I think there are signs that both companies and capitalism in general are getting ready. The running out of runway one is the one that motivates me, and I am more and more convinced that this is doable. Up until now, there's been a lot of questions as to whether you could ever define this perfect state. I think we can, and we can base it on science. So, a truly sustainable business, and I'm about to give you the definition, the working definition that we have right now for what a truly sustainable business is. By the way, this is iteration 14 of this. And you will probably recognize the concentric circles of the reality of how the world works. So what we're saying is that the economy and the little x, the company within that economy, are wholly owned subsidiaries of the environment and society. And in fact, society and the economy are wholly owned subsidiaries of the parent company called the environment. And if the environment goes out of business, that's not good. So that's the fundamental nested dependencies on how the world really works. And it's time that companies started to acknowledge that in what it is that they do. So for that company to be a truly sustainable enterprise, a truly sustainable business, it needs to create positive environmental, social, and economic value. Originally it said neutral. Now we're thinking, to be truly sustainable, it needs to actually be on the positive side. It's actually creating positive value. So that's the what. Where? Throughout its value chain and network, which is a huge gotcha for a whole lot of companies that outsource a lot of this stuff to their suppliers. So as Loblaws gets a lot of heat for what's going on in factories in Bangladesh that they have no ownership of, it's not because they do have ownership of it, but because their suppliers' suppliers are using those factories to produce goods that they sell. So the chain of accountability is very, very much there, and that's why it's reflected here. And why would we do this? Because we want to make sure that we contribute to the possibility that human and other life on Earth will flourish forever. That's what this is all about. So, essentially what we're saying is that if this company were to operate for the next 5, 10, 50, 100,000 years, that it would not only do no harm, it would do well by doing some good. What good? Adding some value to the environment, social, and economic layers of this nested set of eggs. How's that feel? I think we're getting close. You can probably articulate it a little bit better, but it's important that we say, okay, this is what it's there to do. It's like it's its purpose. That's the purpose of the company. Okay, so we need to just tease that out a little bit more. So, okay. So what would that look like if it's going to add value to those things? And that's what we're working on now. The flow of our logic is that we are looking at the conditions, the fundamental science-based conditions that the environment requires to be resilient and flourishing and healthy. And there are some which society requires to be resilient and flourishing and healthy. Those are the fundamental things. And the fundamental purpose of business is not to screw them up. So we need to understand what those things are. And then we come up with some design constraints. If you're going to design a business, those are the design constraints. You can do anything you want, but just don't violate these design constraints based on these systems conditions. And we'll know that you haven't when you are meeting these key performance indicators with their associated goals. So that's how we'll know how you're going. So we'll go into their clipboard of 18 things on it and just kind of ask you, how's it going on this? With metrics. And the metrics is a nightmare. So, the systems conditions, in case you're wondering, come from the natural step. I've been following them for years and years and years, way before I went on their board 10 years ago. They are as close as you can come to the fundamental science behind what makes the world work. So if we're not going to screw up the environment, we need to be careful about those three things. Those are the three systems principles for a sustainable environment. And these are the 5 systems conditions of what society needs people to have if society is going to be robust and healthy and resilient. There's lots of debate about that. The social sciences are not nearly as helpful as you'd hope they would be on that stuff, but that's the working set that we're working with. It's as good as we've got. So those are the 8 things. So when we talk about the 8 systems conditions, those are the 8 systems conditions, and the design constraints are direct derivatives of those. Okay, so we're organizing our key performance indicators around ESG. How many have heard of that acronym before? ESG. Okay, if you haven't, and there's a good bet that you haven't, you should understand that ESG is becoming a replacement, a substitute, a synonym for sustainability. It stands for environmental, social, and governance. So if the Harvard Business Review or the Economist or the MIT Sloan Review or any of these business journals is talking about sustainability, there's a pretty good bet that they will talk about ESG at least as much as they talk about sustainability. So it's becoming a replacement word for it. When the surveys are done of the CEOs and the other folks in the C-suite, very often those surveys are called ESG surveys. So whether you agree with it or not, that's the language that they're using. We thought, well, what the heck? We'll just organize our KPIs around E, S, and G. So that's the organizing framework. Meet them where they are. All right, so here we go. There are 18 that I'm going to flip through here fairly quickly. It's been up as high as 27, there were 21, there were 26, and as of 2 weeks ago, there are 18. So it's a moving target. I think we'll end up somewhere between 20 and 30. So the environmental ones, I think we're getting close on the environmental ones. There are some that have to do with energy and greenhouse gases. So what we've got here is the indicator as well as a very, very short description of what the metric is. Water, materials, waste pollution and their impact on ecosystem services. And you heard a little bit of reference yesterday to ecosystem services and the various initiatives that are underway to try to articulate what those are and how to put some metrics around them. And I think that companies need to not only do no damage, but they may need to actually be restorative. So you'll see some question marks beside some of these because they are probably the ones that we need to put the most work into. And the metrics around ecosystem services are still a bit of a black art, but we're getting better. On the society and people part, this is really hard. Wow, hard for a whole bunch of reasons. So we were talking about people. We said, okay, which people exactly are we talking about here? So we decided we're going to focus on three different stakeholders. The employees who work for the company, the community where the company is located, and the customers who use their products and services. There are a lot more other stakeholders. We're just focusing on those three. I think if we can get it right for those three, we'll probably be making progress here. So from an employee point of view, that they pay them a fair living wage. This is absolutely crucial. It wasn't as crucial when we started this. We're becoming more and more convinced that it's absolutely crucial. And the human capital, that their pool of people is actually becoming better each year. You're enhancing the value of your human capital. And there's some very, very creative metrics on how to do that we're tapping into that give us hope that that's possible to figure out. Then there's a local economy. So is the company adding to the health of the local economy, of the community well-being, and is it improving its social license to operate? Those are usually community-oriented things. Those are three metrics. We may combine a couple of them, but the metrics around those are very, very tough. And then the customer well-being. Are their products and services actually improving their customer well-being, and how would you know that? And all the usual questions around that. So those are the employee, community, and customer ones. Governance is sort of it's a strange thing. What we're saying is we're going to excuse the fact that we've got these six because we didn't want them at first. And then we said, okay, we put them in because everyone's talking about it anyway. The performance stuff is on social and environmental stuff. This is how you get it. This ensures that if you do perform really, really well on the environmental and social stuff, that it wasn't a fluke. That it's baked into the way the company operates, into the culture of the company, into the policies of the company, into the metrics of the company, so that the two guys who are the champions in the C-suite got hit by a truck, that the company would keep doing what it's doing and stay sustainable. So essentially you need to bake it into the company, and that's called governance. So you make sure that the board is on board with this, that the policies and systems reflect all the principles we're talking about, that it's operating as you might expect from an ethical point of view and so on, and it's going to be able to stay in business. So that's the governance 6. So that's kind of where we are, and we think that the things that we're talking about here map fairly well to the attributes of a company that would do really, really well on capitalism 2.0. We think that this is going to future-proof the company if it gets to this kind of stage or works towards that if we are working towards a different form of capitalism, this will position it to do really, really well because it's tracking the right things and doing well on the right things. So what we're talking about here is multiple business cases that not only work today, but hopefully will work in the future to show that if companies embrace this approach to running their businesses, that it wouldn't be a sacrifice, it would be an advantage. You'll notice that the title of my book wasn't the sustainability sacrifice. It was the sustainability advantage. I mean, it will be an advantage. And especially if we get smarter on the metrics, and especially if the accounting community help us legitimize some of these measurements in the traditional financial statements. So that part of it you're going to hear more about from Bill, and you'll have a chance to give us some questions and feedback at the end of that. So Bill, over to you.